Welcome to Modern Anarchy, the podcast featuring real conversations with conscious objectors to the status quo. I'm your host, Nicole.
I tried to keep her quiet, but she's screaming inside of me. I tried to keep her hiding, oh, shut up. I tried to keep her quiet, but she's a wild, wild woman.
On today's show, we have Cruel Valentine, and I can't even express to you what a treat this episode is. There's so much information, such a vulnerability that they brought to the show that I'm just truly thankful for them to come on and speak so bravely. So today we talk about the politics of burlesque, what is sex work, reprogramming straight cis white men, financial domination. The conversation goes to so many aspects that I couldn't have even known of this multidimensional person. And I think y'all are really going to love this. So just tune in. Well, welcome to Modern Anarchy. It's great to have you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
I know you have a lot of different titles for your job. Yes. You're a very multidimensional human. How would you describe yourself?
Oh my gosh. So how long do we have?
Yeah, I mean, take all the space you need.
So to narrow it down, I usually boil it down to a short sentence, which is that I am a burlesque entertainer, sex worker, performing artist, creative business consultant, and diversity and inclusion specialist.
Wow. You are the perfect person for the show. I don't even know where to start. Which one speaks to you the most that you'd love to talk about?
They're all so entangled. It's kind of hard to distinguish them from one another because they cross over so much, just in the way that I live my life. I do everything under a singular umbrella brand, and so it's all connected. So it's not like compartmentalized.
Okay. What does that mean?
Well, I started my brand, Cruel Valentine. I started my company in 2007, and I started as a burlesque performer. And then it sort of grew as I met people and networked within the performance industry. And eventually I branched off into sex work too. Burlesque has always been kind of at the heart of what I do. I hold a musical theater bachelor's from Columbia College, Chicago. Being on stage is what I live for. And that's kind of how I got my start with everything. But anything can be a stage. As they say, all the world's a stage. And yeah, I've found ways to embody that love for the performing arts in different sorts of circumstances, and from anything from speaking at conferences to dominating someone to, any sort of thing. So yeah, they all kind of cross over and interact with each other. And I find that each part of what I do informs the next part in multiple ways, especially since I live and I work at the intersection of so many marginalized identities.
Which I really love. Wow, I don't even know where to start. These are too many good things. I'm just like, yes. Okay, well then let's start from the very beginning. Obviously, no one just pops up doing burlesque. How did you get started? Where did all of this come from?
So my freshman year of college, I studied musical theater, as I said, and part of our program, the requirements, at least at the time, required a full year of musical theater history. And a large chunk of that is sort of dedicated to how the history of burlesque and cabaret and even synchronized swimming shows and diving shows and even minstrel shows and all sorts of different types of performance art, good and bad, sort of informed our modern practice of the standard two-act musical theater production that we kind of know today. And so I learned a little bit about burlesque, and I found it really fascinating, and I got really excited about it, and was like, okay, what do I do with this excitement? I had never seen a show in real life or anything. I'd only seen, clips and examples from my own research and things we had watched in school. But then I heard about a show that was happening basically when I was getting back from my winter break between the two semesters. And I ended up getting tickets to this show. And it was actually my first date with my partner.
Okay.
Who I'm with today as well. So it was like the beginning of a lot of things for me. But I went to that show and it was just life changing. I
Mm,
saw so many different. It was, if I had one opportunity to see my first show, like I'm so glad it was that one because it was
mhm,
a super diverse cast. It was extremely queer and it featured headliners from all over the place. A lot of people who were legends and major
mhm,
title holders. And in burlesque, when I say legend, that means someone who has been performing a very long time. So
mhm.
we have legends who are performing who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s
Mm,
today,
I love
and
that.
so forth. So lots of older performers, people who had been around in the industry through different ups and downs of the industry and different approaches to the work. So it was very cool to see so many different interpretations. The show was also very political and it was
Mm,
very in your face. It was no holds barred. It was not ironed out or or sort of like refined for any particular palette. It was just
mhm,
very very in your face and very bold. And I was like, that's what I need to be doing. And then
mm,
a few months later, I heard about an audition and I went out for it and I started working with a troupe for a while. I was originally cast as an understudy and then I did a show as a feature with them, or a couple shows where I was a feature with them. And then I broke out as a soloist on my own
mm.
about a year after that. So
Wow.
yeah, I just
That's
dove
really
right
fast.
in.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So that first time you're sitting there in that show, you're just vibing with all of it.
Oh my gosh. Like, I was like, why was I not born in this room? Like, I was like, this is
Yes.
everything I'm about.
Okay, that's amazing because that was not my first experience. Obviously, I come from well, my background is Christianity, right? So my first time I went to a burlesque show, I was just completely overwhelmed by the amount of sexuality I was seeing. So, what was your background then before that moment? Because you're very comfortable clearly in that space. And so, what was your messaging that kind of allowed you to even feel comfortable just going to a show like that?
I mean, I've always been around the performing arts and I've always been a very like queer and
Yes.
sexual and sex positive
Yes.
person. And so it was just a really good fit. It wasn't I wasn't hesitant about it or anything. I
Wow.
walked in and I was like, "Oh, I'm home." It was very weird. It was like going home but you've never been home before.
Yes.
It was very it was just life changing. It changed
Wow.
everything for
It
me.
just all clicked for you right there.
Yeah, 100%.
Amazing. And so then you start doing the performance and then teaching, you said after a year?
Well, I
Or
broke out as a soloist after a year, and I probably started teaching in like I want to say 2010.
okay, and so you still teach now?
I do, yes.
Wow. Okay. So you're very into the community in Chicago, I'm sure, and the whole burlesque scene that is here.
I am, but I primarily tour. Obviously, not in the
Okay.
current circumstances, but I perform on the road more than I do locally.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always nice to perform at home, but I travel a lot under normal circumstances.
Neat. So, what is burlesque for you? I feel like a lot of different dancers might have different intentions of going into burlesque and what their sort of performance is like. Do you feel like you have a definition or, mission behind what you do?
Well, burlesque, as it was sort of created, was this art form that was basically designed to lampoon and criticize and satirize the status quo and the ruling class. But it has taken many forms over the years, and it's sort of expanded, and it's become this really interesting vehicle for people
Mm-hmm.
to say a lot of different things. And a lot of times people will sort of focus it around sexual empowerment, or people will focus it around identity, around
Mm-hmm.
queerness, or perhaps like their heritage and ethnic or racial identity, or a cause, a political movement, or something like that. So it does kind of vary quite a bit, but that is kind of the core definition. What
Mm-hmm.
I said before about it being something to sort of call attention to and point out, areas of hypocrisy or things that are sort of wrong with the way we as a society function.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it is just through the art of exaggeration and sort of doing these things that are beautiful and maybe even seen as high class or classy,
Mm-hmm.
and doing them to a point where it's almost just overkill. It's like grotesque to a point. And a lot of those original acts where they were super sensual and done in this very like supposedly classy way with these decadent bejeweled outfits and whatnot, a lot of that was sort of taking this idea of like, oh, what is the ideal, like high class, beautiful woman who is,
Mm-hmm.
performing her role in society, and sort of taking it and turning that concept on its end by, stripping down and bumping and grinding and doing all of these things that were, seen as, sort of heinous and shocking.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Thank you for sharing that history of it. I think that's so important to kind of understand where it started from and what the purpose is of the act and the performance. So for you, I'm sure you've expressed a lot of different messages in your work. Is there one that you're specifically proud of that you know fondly that you'd want to share?
Ooh, gosh, there are so
I
many.
know.
It's difficult to narrow it down. Because I mean, I've been doing burlesque since 2007, so it'll be in May. It'll be my 14-year burlesque
Wow.
anniversary.
Wow.
I have a lot of acts that are sort of like what some might refer to as a signature act or something that I'm kind of like known for or people associate with me. And there are a few key ones that I like to talk about. One of them is an act that I did for a show that was about people's like national heritage. And
Mm.
so part of my family is from Sweden, and I decided to do an act that was a tribute to IKEA, which was,
Yes.
not what people expect when they hear that a Black performer is coming to the stage
Mm.
to do a show about their heritage. So it was just sort of poking fun at that part of my
Mm-hmm.
identity, and, doing something playful and fun. And also, Swedish meatballs are the bomb. So,
Yes.
so
Yes.
that's like kind of a weird one. The act is I'm entirely clothed in an outfit I made out of IKEA bags.
I love it. I imagined a Swedish meatball for the costume for a brief moment, which I think could equally be amazing.
I feel like I would look like the dude from Aqua Teen Hunger Force.
Oh, yes, just like the big meat round. Yes. Yeah. We can make it sexy. Why
Maybe
not?
I'll update the costume.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just super silly and playful, and I sort of go through an instruction manual as I'm disrobing and use those as sort
Oh,
of the guide
that
for
is
what I'm doing.
hilarious.
So that's one that's kind of fun and just playful. One that carries a bit more of a punch and has more of a critical eye is my act to Mississippi Goddamn by Nina
Mm,
Simone. It's a singing act, so it's an homage to her performance at Carnegie Hall in, I want to say, 1963 or 4.
mm-hmm.
And I strip out of a simple gown and chains, and I unshackle
Mm,
myself on stage. And so that one
wow.
is one that carries a lot of deep emotional meaning for me. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very, I don't want to say difficult act to perform, but
Mm,
it has so much weight to it, just emotionally, and especially these past several years as I've done it more and
mm,
more. The current context makes it, it's draining in a way to perform it. And I think it's
yeah.
important to perform it, but it's also, something that I kind of have to take time to recover from after I do, because it's
Mm,
just that intense for me.
yeah. Could you tell me more about what that means to you? I'd love to hear.
Well, it's a song about Black liberation and civil rights and sort of the shortcomings of society and the active oppression of Black people. And it's about segregation and a lot of different race relation issues. And it explores the murder of Black people.
Mm,
And as we look around, even in the past week, 2 weeks, like how many Black people have died at the hands of police.
yeah.
So yeah, it's a very, very deeply personal, but also very
Mm,
universal topic to address. And so it's something that
mm,
I have a responsibility to take care of myself as a Black person as I'm performing that, but I also feel, that I have a responsibility to anyone else whose identity is represented by that song to do it justice and to perform it in a way
mm,
that is constructive and hopefully helps us toward something better, to make sure that it's something that's liberating and not
mm.
traumatizing or something that, further compounds the pain that we're all enduring, because that is a lot. So,
Is there somewhere that if someone's listening to this podcast and wanted to see that it's posted or that I could share?
I think that one is linked on my website under video. If it's not, I can put it
Okay.
on after we talk. And so by the time
Yeah.
this is live, it'll be
Yes.
there.
Yes. Yes. I would love to link people to your website. Go watch, spread
Yeah,
it.
it's just
Yes.
cruelvalentine.com.
Great. Awesome. Thank you so much for
Of
sharing that.
course.
And you also talked about burlesque and queerness. I'd love to hear the connection to that for you as well.
Well, I mean, a lot of people look at burlesque and they see, people who are perceived as women, which is not how I identify. I'm non-binary, but people who are perceived as women. So they see women stripping for men is what they see, and that there's this sort of assumption that the work we do is tailored toward the male gaze, but we honestly have such like a queer and female presence in our shows. So it's lots of queer folks,
Mm-hmm.
lots of female, non-binary folks, trans folks of all stripes. So it's not as many straight cis men as people tend to think. And a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times, if they are there, they're there with a partner who is not a straight cis white man. Very interesting. And I mean, I think exploiting the male gaze for profit and to help people like liberate themselves and be able to take care of themselves, like I have no problem with that. I do it all the time. But when
Yes.
I do burlesque,
Yes.
it's not so much that. It's not the same as the sex
Mm.
work I do. It's a little different. So I'm out here doing it for the queers, including for myself.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, most of the people that I performed with early on, like even were queer, and our shows were very queer centric. It was never like, oh, like walk to the end of the stage and make sure you find a gentleman to bat your eyes at or something like that. It was just
Mm.
like, yeah, just go out there and give them hell and do whatever the fuck you want.
Yes. And how empowering is that to go and own that stage out there?
I love it. I think everyone should try something like that in their life. Doesn't have to necessarily be burlesque, but just a chance to perform in whatever way speaks to you and to just take up space.
Mm. Okay, so for someone who is hearing all that you're talking about with burlesque and really wants to get involved, but is a little bit nervous or maybe doesn't know how to get into it, what would you say for someone who's thinking about hopping into this space?
Go to shows. If you haven't been to shows or if you haven't been to many shows, just go to shows, hang out, observe, see what you like about burlesque, what appeals about it to you, or what appeals to you about it, I should say,
Mm-hmm.
and explore it. Do some research. You don't have to
Mm.
jump into anything. It's not really the kind of thing where you can just get up and take your clothes off randomly somewhere. There are channels. A lot of people start by taking lessons, or at the very least, you'll have to like develop a body of work and submit, videos or do an audition for someone. So,
Mm-hmm.
it's you can dip your toe in and then stick the rest of your foot in and then your leg. It's not
Mm-hmm.
something that is necessarily done all at once, especially as the community is a little more established and more fleshed out than it was when I was starting in the olden days. There was a little less structure, and people would just be like, "Hey, I'm doing a show like next week. Are you in?" Like, sure.
Why
uh,
not?
and so, I mean, I have mixed feelings, I guess, about sort of the evolution of burlesque in Chicago and in other major markets across the U.S., especially because the more structured something becomes, that means that there's hopefully like there are standards of behavior and etiquette and best practices and things like that. But it can also mean that, there are systems put into place that, present barriers to access,
Mm.
especially for marginalized people, people who can't necessarily afford to, take 12 weeks of classes at a studio just to get a
Mm-hmm.
chance to be on stage for a show they're not getting paid for, things
Yes.
like that. So, yeah, I mean, personally, I think if you're able to train privately with someone, that's a really great way to get into it, especially if you're someone who's exceptionally like nervous or anxious about trying. Being able to work one on one with someone. I mean, that's one of my favorite things to do.
Mm.
Is That's why I teach primarily private lessons. I do public workshops occasionally, but I really like working on the more developmental end and being able to help someone, find whatever it is about burlesque that appeals to them and makes their heart sing, and sort of, zone
Yeah.
in on that and help them, set goals and work toward them, whether it's to perform professionally, or if it's like, oh, I just want to do a dance for my intimate partner, or I just want to
Mm-hmm.
do a little choreography for myself, or I just want a fun burlesque themed workout. So I just want to like learn some dance moves, like whatever it is. It's nice to be able to sort of tailor to what people need instead of presenting, sort of a standardized curriculum and hoping that, the 20 people in the room are all on board.
Certainly, certainly. So for someone who maybe can't afford classes, where would you recommend? Where would you send them?
There are lots of shows that are presented with no cover in Chicago.
Okay.
I don't say free because there's no such thing as free labor. Any show that you see that
Mm-hmm.
is marketed as a free show is actually sponsored by the venue or by another entity that is presenting it. So nothing is free. So even if something is free, if you get the chance to consume that free entertainment, free to you, know that it should be valued. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, look up free shows in and around Chicago or wherever you happen to be, and just see as much as you can, and hang out and talk to people. Most
Mm.
performers, I mean, of course, don't like dominate anyone's time. It's hard to like catch your breath once you're off stage and people want to unwind a little, but there's no harm in saying hi and introducing yourself and expressing your admiration for what someone has. And you never know who you'll meet. You might
Mm-hmm.
make a friend or a contact that could be really helpful to you down the road, but it's totally possible to develop this by yourself. I've trained as a dancer in my past since I was maybe 8, 7. So I have a
Mm-hmm.
lot of dance background and performance background, various things on stage. But I didn't take burlesque lessons.
Mm-hmm.
I showed up to an audition and it worked out. So if you work really hard and you
Wow.
give people what they're asking for when they're saying, submit these materials or record this or show up with this in hand, and you do a good job, I mean, yeah, you can get cast. You don't have to get a degree in burlesque to perform in burlesque,
Right. Right.
because there's not really such a thing as a degree in burlesque unless you do a custom program for yourself. Like I know several people have done. I know that
What?
there's at least one doctor of burlesque
What?
that exists in the world, but it was a self-made program at their school. So like an independently developed and
I
curated
love
program that
that.
they designed for themselves.
They are the one and only doctor of burlesque. That's amazing.
As far as I'm aware, at least.
Wow. That's really neat.
Yeah, and also, watching videos online is really helpful. There are a lot of them out there, and
Mm-hmm.
follow entertainers that you admire on social media. And a lot of us, we'll post things about, of course, shows we have coming up, or like clips and videos, and about not just our acts as we perform them on stage, but sometimes rehearsal videos or other aspects of our process.
Mm.
So there's a lot that you can sort of learn and absorb that way as well. Instructors, myself included, do offer sliding scale and payment plans selectively. So if you reach out to anyone who openly advertises that they do that, you can try to work something out with
Mm-hmm.
them.
Those are some great resources. Thank you for plugging all of those. I think
Of
that'd
course.
be helpful for anyone who's listening who's wondering, yeah, how can I get in this if I maybe can't afford it? So it's really great. And I know you said sex work. I know anyone who's listening to this podcast is going to want to know, what does that mean? What do you do? Like, could you tell me more about that as well?
Well, sex work is an umbrella term that sort of encompasses any sort of labor that is designed to generate an excited sexual response of some sort. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's a sex act with someone where you're physically touching someone. It can also be, though that is absolutely a valid type of sex work, but a lot of people think it is just that.
Mm.
So a lot of people think it is, what would be called full service sex work.
Mm-hmm.
But sex work can be anything from that to stripping in a club to doing working as a phone sex operator to doing work on cam online, text-based sex chat, domination and
Mm-hmm.
professional domination or submission, and a whole variety of things. There's not just one type of sex work. A lot of
Yes.
people sort of oversimplify it. So it's definitely a range, and most people who are in sex work do more than one
Mm.
aspect of sex work. Some people sort of zone in and like focus on one type of sex work, but it's, at least in my experience and the people that I know and work with and have met in my life, in my career, it's pretty typical that people do more than one form. If not at once, then perhaps they have past experience in one and now do another, or, something of that nature. So it's kind of a big old term that is oversimplified a lot of the time.
No, that's really good. Thank you for plugging that. So what does your sex work look like? If you're willing to share, of course, this is all your space.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I work as a professional dominatrix.
Okay.
And I focus on reparation-driven financial domination. That's sort of my primary area of focus, but I also incorporate lots of different areas of kink and BDSM under that sort of overall, like that overarching mission.
Okay, tell me more what that means.
So I reclaim the money that men, and largely white men, owe me and people like me for everything. Look around the world.
Wow.
Look to your left, look to your right, look up and down, all of that. We are all owed for that, for the generational trauma, for everything that's going on right the fuck now, even. Like, yeah. So I reclaim my energy and my money that is owed to me for the labor of my ancestors and the labor of myself.
Hell yes. That is amazing. Yes. Okay. If you're willing to share more, what does that look like in action? Yeah. I mean, I want to know, like, this is fascinating.
It takes a lot of forms, but a lot of what I do is the consensual bullying, humiliating, retraining and reprogramming of straight cis white men to make them into better citizens of the world. Wow. And help them to be better allies to people like me. So it's not just a simple transaction for me and for what I do. And there's nothing wrong with a simple transaction, but I just like to overcomplicate things. So I add these layers of social justice work. So I will make my clients or my submissives write papers, do research and write papers on social justice, women's issues and things like that. Or I will, give them charities that they are required to donate a certain amount to every so often, one at a time, or sometimes on a recurring basis, depending on the situation. So I'm basically just trying to make them less shitty.
Wow.
Because I feel like that responsibility is sort of thrust on people like me in general. It's sort of expected of us, in any workplace. Right. If I'm working in an office with someone, I'm supposed to keep a level head when they do shitty things and explain why it's wrong, or explain like why I'd prefer if they didn't refer to me as that, or, what have you. So these things are, it's stuff that I'm expected to do anyway that I refuse to do for free anymore.
Yes. Wow. Okay. I'm very interested. So what person that needs to learn all of this is willing to pay for this? I feel like the people who really need to learn this shit don't want to come to learn, like what sort of person are you talking to?
Well, you can't get them all, that's for sure.
But
but at least people who are, for lack of a better word, salvageable. People who have an interest in growth. And, a lot of times people who might think like, oh, I'm a good ally. And I will very quickly and devastatingly explain to them why they're not, but I will help them get better. And so this is not like a training program where it's like, oh, pay me and I'll like help shape you into this in 8 weeks. It's more of, it's less transactional for me when I do this type of work. And I do other types of sex work too, and that is, more transactional. For sure. But for my financial domination, since it is focused around reparations, there's a lot more of sort of this constant give and take. In financial domination, the object of the fetish itself is money. So it's different than being paid for a service, at least the way that I do it. Other people might disagree. And there's definitely overlap from, between pro-domination and financial domination. They are not always the same thing, but they can be, and they often are. So when I do financial domination, it's a lot more deeply personal to me. I also have that is a fetish of mine. So it's not something that I'm putting on airs for. It is something that I do enjoy, that sort of dynamic. But it's also, it's a good vehicle that I've been able to help people improve themselves, but not just for the benefit of themselves, improve themselves in a way that is beneficial to the world around them and makes them more aware of what's going on and makes them active participants in social change instead of bystanders saying like, oh, well, it sucks that's happening. I wish I could do something.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, doing something, people are like, oh, well, should I lead a march or should I do this or should I do that? And people want to take leadership roles to sort of be allies or, contribute to these causes, when actually that's just ends up manifesting as them taking more space up. And so a lot of times really putting your money where your mouth is. And I will say, like, I have a fetish for money, but I hate capitalism. So my fetish for money is really more about power than anything. Taking away resources from people who have too many of them. And, giving them to myself because I deserve resources, obviously, but also redistributing them to other people who need them. And a lot of times people who need them more. So either getting money from submissives and then redistributing it, or directing submissives, straight to different causes, different fundraisers, mutual aid funds, etc., that need assistance, and, having them report back to me and show evidence that they have done that work.
Yes. Okay. I believe you used the word fetish, right, to describe this?
Yes.
Okay. So how did you discover this fetish? I think this is very unique. Like, how did you find out that this works for you?
I will clarify just in case it wasn't clear the way I presented it, but my fetish is for financial domination. The reparations aspect is more of my passion for social justice intersecting with that.
Okay.
So it's those two things coming together.
Yes.
I don't believe in race play because the fact of the matter is that if I say that I'm participating in race play with someone who has more racial privilege than me, it's not really play for me because I can't escape it. It's not something that I can like come and go from when I wish, and for white people it is. White people don't have to think about race if they don't want to. And I refuse to give them the benefit of them getting to experience it as something that is play.
Yes.
It's just not. And even though there is, a racial dynamic in a lot of what I do, it is because there's a racial dynamic in the way that I move through the world in general. It's not because it's something that I fetishize.
Definitely.
So that's something I won't put up with. So if anybody listening was like, oh, I'm going to dial that person up and get some race play, you were sorely mistaken.
Absolutely not happening here.
I don't know who would be listening to this who would think that way, but just in case, you never know on the internet.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm someone who grew up without a lot of access to resources, and I've dealt with food insecurity and housing insecurity, and I've had like a lot of financial challenges and other hurdles that I've had to get over, and I've experienced a lot of trauma. And I grew up in an abusive household. I was emotionally abused by my mother for my entire upbringing. And so a lot of the coping mechanisms and, sort of trauma-informed responses that I developed to survive were actually like really unhealthy coping mechanisms that, caused me to put even more undue stress on myself to accommodate other people and to sacrifice my own happiness and comfort and safety for the benefit of others. And so a part of my healing journey from all of that has been, actually standing up and saying, I deserve things. It's really sad and weird that I didn't think I deserved things, or I acted like I didn't deserve things for so long. But, now that I'm away from that environment, years and years and years later, it's nice to be able to say like, oh, yes, you should give me something because I'm good at what I do, or because I'm a person who you look up to because of these reasons, or what have you. So for me, it's been kind of a part of that healing, and just reclaiming a lot of the time that I lost, bending over backwards to accommodate other people, and, letting people get away with saying things to me or in front of me, or, enacting behaviors near me that were not okay, that I didn't have the bandwidth or the energy or the control of the situation to address at the time. And so taking that power back and taking, those resources and those, that access, that financial access and social capital, sort of like taking that back, because it is something that is owed to me and people like me.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I could feel the emotion as you were speaking it. And I
Yeah.
really appreciate you sharing that. And let's just take a moment to acknowledge where you're at. This is badass. All of that you just said, and now you're here running this business that you've created and creating this space and inviting new people. Like, I just want to take a moment to honor that. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. For someone who's listening and resonating with a lot of what you're saying, that's a journey. How do we invite other people into that space of ownership, taking up space, finding this, I don't even know what the words are for it, but discovering you in everything that you are? How would you... That's a big question. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like,
how do you find yourself?
Yeah,
Step one.
But like, that's kind of the show, right? Is like, I want to bring on all these different people who have found whatever that is for them, and and give them space to invite other people to find that too, and learn from their journeys, and anything that they can impart of wisdom is so valuable.
I think getting to know yourself and asking yourself lots of questions, taking stock of what you're feeling in any given moment, what's going through your head, and really respecting and honoring those parts of you, even the ones that are challenging, is what I would, sort of designate as the first step. Because you can't reclaim what is owed to you if you don't know what's owed to you. So really, taking account of your history and where you're at right now, and, sort of assessing what you want and what you need to survive, and not just survive, but also to thrive. And sort of starting there, and then exploring ways to get that. And it doesn't have to be through kink. It doesn't have to be through BDSM. It doesn't have to be through burlesque or performance art or anything specific. It has to be whatever it is that speaks to you and makes your heart sing.
Yes.
That's all that it is, really. And I mean, that's a broad simplification of it.
Right.
But yeah, it's really important that you get to know yourself. And that can be something that, that's an ongoing journey. That's not something where it's like, oh, well, I'll just like lock myself in my house for a week and just like hang out with myself and have some tea and do some self-care and take a bubble bath, and then I'll be totally like right as rain and ready to do the next thing. It's ongoing. Therapy, highly recommend. Therapy is another thing that comes in many forms. So if you are into like therapy in like the Western sense, that's great. If you're into other forms of therapy, that's great too. Like I see a therapist like for hourly sessions, and that's, something that works for me. I'm also on anti-depressants. What? That is super helpful.
Yes. Can we talk about that?
Wellbutrin is my other relationship that I'm in. Yeah, that is like so important. But yeah, whatever it is that like makes you feel balanced and feel cared for and safe, or as safe as it is possible to be in this world, as safe as you can control in your own little corner of the world, follow that thread, and it will lead you to other things.
Yeah. And discovering that thread, I think, is the hardest part. There's so many societal messages that are like, here's the thread over here. Here's the thread over here. Like, which one do I want? But, it's just so hard to start turning that, work inward of what do I want? What brings me pleasure? So yeah, I think at first it's really difficult to do that work, but the more that you do it, the more that you start to feel all of your different fibers inside your body, and you just start to feel it, and it's so beautiful. Okay, I think I'm overwhelmed by all of this. Let me see, where do I want to go next in this conversation?
Take a deep breath.
I know. I just get so overwhelmed, but there's so many topics on the show that I want to talk about, and it's hard when I have amazing people on the show who can talk about all of them, because then I get a little overwhelmed. I'm like, I want to talk about your antidepressants. I want to talk about your gender identity. I want to talk about this. I want to talk about that. It's like, God, I gotta slow down. It's like one social cause at a time. But I really do appreciate your outspokenness about Wellbutrin, and if you're willing to talk about that too, I think that is an area that a lot of people are very hesitant to talk about, especially with the ownership that you just, shouted and shook your hands and all of it.
Well, firstly, I'm not sponsored by Wellbutrin, just for the record.
Yes.
Antidepressants are a thing, like any medication. I mean, not every medication works for every person. So I'm definitely not advocating for that drug specifically. That is just the one that happens to work for me. So please don't take this as medical advice, anyone.
No one should take advice from the show ever. Right? Like anything medical, legal, absolutely not.
Honestly, like they shouldn't take medical advice from like pharmaceutical ads on television or at train stops or whatever either. But it's the world in which we live.
Right.
I mean that is something that, like I first took antidepressants in, I think when I was in 8th grade or so. I had a horrible time on them. I felt terrible and it made me extremely suicidal. And this was like kind of around the time where they were like first starting to go like, oh, sometimes antidepressants actually make you more depressed. That's so wacky. And a lot of people were like, being hospitalized and dying because of this. And they were, pretty slow to catch on to that trend, which is like so bizarre and sad. So I stopped taking my meds cold turkey, which is not something I necessarily recommend in general. But I unfortunately was in a situation where I was, under the supervision of parents and physicians who did not listen to me. And so I didn't really have a better choice than to do that, because I knew that the changes I had seen in myself and how I was feeling, the timeline was directly like correlated with the timeline that I had been taking those meds, and it was getting worse. And I was like, I'm not going to let this shitty little pill be the end of me. That's terrible. So no. I ended up having to like defy medical advice from my doctors and my psychiatrist and my family. So not the ideal situation, but to adults listening, you might be able to have hopefully more of a choice and in the matter, and like, hopefully if you're not getting the care that you feel you need, or you don't feel respected or heard by your medical professionals, like try your best to find other people until you do. I know that, access is an issue with that sort of healthcare. And, if you, especially like if you're on like a government plan or something, and it's like you can only see certain people. So I know that that's not always super easy.
Right.
But, remember that also like primary care physicians can make those prescriptions as well. So really explore your options and try to find a team that will advocate for you. But part of that is you having to advocate for yourself. Know that if you are started on a medication, that it might not necessarily be a good fit, and you need to pay attention to how you're feeling, how you're responding to the whole world around you, and, what's going through your head on a daily basis. And, there is an adjustment period for a lot of the meds, but some of them are just not a good fit for your body chemistry. That was me with SSRIs. Like I took Zoloft was the one I took most recently, because I was off meds for many years because I was like uninsured and poor. And then I was like, hey, I really need to think about getting back on meds. So I talked to my doctor and my therapist, and I took Zoloft, and it was a really bad time. It was a really fucking bad time. So much of my life revolves around like my sexual identity, and I could not fuck. Like I felt nauseous, and like if this is like neutral and this is horny, I was like here. Like I was like, I don't know, like crazy anti-horny, to a point where it was like extremely depressing and like startling for me, because I didn't feel like myself. And sex is not the most important thing in my life, and I can go without sex. It's not something that I need to survive, but the fact that I was suddenly so repulsed by something that meant so much to me was like, hold on, this is a red flag. This is not working. I also just felt nauseous. So I was on it for about a month. My doctor told me to give it about a month, I think. And I was just nauseous 24/7. And I never threw up, which is the weird part. It was almost like worse. because there was no end to it, you know? It was not like, oh, there's some relief on the other side. It was just like, I felt like I was about to puke just all the time. So I couldn't eat, and I was just like, I was extremely depressed, and I felt suicidal again, and that was the opposite of the intent. So,
Right.
yeah, I was like, I need to stop taking these meds. So we need to readdress this. So let's get back to the drawing board. Because I can't live like this, and I won't live long like this if I have to keep doing this. So then I got put on Wellbutrin after I phased out the Zoloft. I phased in Wellbutrin a little bit later. I took like a little bit of a break to like give my body some time to like reorient. But yeah, it's been such a life-changing thing for me. Like I'm like, I feel, I feel everything. I don't feel like deliriously happy. I feel everything, but it feels manageable. So I'm aware that I'm depressed and I have symptoms of depression, but they don't trample me in the same way that they used to. And I don't feel nauseous and I can fuck. So yeah, that's like ideal scenario. But it's also nice to know that if for any reason it stops working or it's not enough or it's too much at some point, I can, feel confident going back to my doctor and saying like, hey, we need to readdress this. So a lot of it is, having that confidence to speak up for yourself. And if you don't have that confidence to speak up for yourself, try to, if you have a next of kin, a loved one who you can like authorize to, advocate on your behalf, that is a great thing to do. But also, fake it till you make it. If you don't feel confident, if you know you need the thing, do what you can to get the thing and then, freak out about it afterward. You might not feel 100% amazing about having to do it. It might make you nervous or uncomfortable. And a lot of that, has to do with, being depressed or having anxiety, etc. But yeah, I mean, you have to love yourself enough to choose yourself. I have depression, I have anxiety. I have a Xanax prescription, but I hate taking it. So I've taken it maybe like 3 or 4 times in my life because it makes me feel like I'm dead and having an out-of-body experience, which is not super tight. I don't love it.
Yeah, we don't want that.
So I've only taken it when my anxiety got to like an extreme that I could not bear. And yeah, I mean, but Wellbutrin has been really helpful for my anxiety and my depression and my PTSD. And I feel like a person, which was not the case for a lot of my life. So it's been not just healing, but also really liberating. I feel whole.
I love that you talked about Zoloft too, because that's what I take. And what a perfect way to talk about this of how I thrive on Zoloft.
Yes!
It's great for me. I'm doing awesome. I can still have sex and it's all great, but not great experience for you. So for anyone listening, it's such different body chemistries. You got to find the one that works for you, and everyone's going to be different. So your friend might say, this one works for me. And like, if it doesn't work for you, that's okay. There's another one out there, or, you'll figure it out. Just don't settle on that first one. And I love that you mentioned talking about it. I think that's such a big piece is when you feel nauseous all day, tell your doctor. That's not normal. You shouldn't feel that way, right? I mean, it's hard until you start to figure it out. And then you learn that you can take one of these drugs and feel normal and feel like yourself again and realize that, wow, all that other stuff I was feeling was not what I was supposed to be feeling. But that process of learning that is hard. And if you don't have a friend next to you or someone else who's done it to be like, hey, that's not normal. You shouldn't feel like you're on drugs. You shouldn't feel like you're nauseous, So I really appreciate the openness with which you bring this topic up.
And especially when you're dealing with something chronic, something long-term, you get accustomed to things. You can get accustomed to anything.
Yeah.
Physical pain, mental, emotional pain, you name it. You can get acclimated to anything. It doesn't mean that it's okay. And that was my experience with like a lot of the ongoing trauma that I experienced. I'm like, well, this is the way it is. So that's just exactly that. And so here I am. No, it was not acceptable just because it was happening and wouldn't stop. That doesn't make it acceptable. Yes. So yeah, if you are in a situation where you have the power to control some of those variables that are impacting you, absolutely do it. I'll do it. if you want, I will go to a doctor's appointment with you and yell at your
Mm,
doctor if your doctor's being a douchebag and saying like, oh no, like, I got a bunch of free pens from, X drug. So this one's the one that you need. Well, it makes me feel terrible. Well, no, just try it for, no. Like if you feel awful on something, you shouldn't be taking it unless it is like the only option for like immediate intervention for, something that is like going to like kill you or permanently harm you like right then.
right. But I mean, there's this history of doctors not listening to people, specifically women of color,
Mhm.
that for so long the medical system has not listened.
Yeah.
So I think it's easier said than done, but let's start doing it, right? And I love that you're giving that resource out there. Someone out there wants to talk to you, maybe wants your advice, you're willing to be that person that's an advocate. And that's all of this stuff you're doing is life changing.
Like I cannot give you medical advice, but I can give
Right.
you yelling at people advice.
Hell
And
yes.
getting
And
your way
sometimes,
advice.
and that's what we need sometimes. I wish we had a little mini voice in our heads that would push us to do that all the time, but it's so hard. So
Yeah,
thank you for being that person for people.
of course. And like, surround yourself with people who feel that way about you.
Hell yes.
Honestly, like, if you're with someone who's like, "Oh, just stick it out. Like it'll be okay." Like maybe that person's not the ideal bestie, or maybe they don't fully understand and they can't, play that role in your life right now, even if they have the best of intentions. Sometimes just need to adjust who you're surrounding yourself with, or, explain in more depth so people can really like get on the same page and get it more than they do. Because not everyone has those same experiences. So, if I'm talking about depression to someone who's never experienced a symptom of depression in their entire life, they're gonna be like, oh well, you could just try like not being so sad. And like,
Oh,
I'll get on that. Like
I love that piece of advice, right? I have anxiety and people say, "Oh, well, it's not that bad." You're like, "Oh, is it?" Okay.
did you just try go for a walk or something? I
Oh,
don't
oh,
know.
oh,
Just like
that just solves it?
do
Yeah, no.
something nice that makes you happy.
Whoa. Okay. Thank you for that worthless piece of advice. Can I go
How much
on
do I
with
owe
my life?
you?
Yeah, exactly. Jesus. Like, wow. I think there's definitely this fear, though, that you start to take these medications and you're going to lose whatever sense of self you've had. But I mean, I think that points to the whole, what you just talked about of we get adapted to whatever state of mind we're in and we think that
Yeah.
this is it. And so it's definitely scary for someone who's never done this, For me personally, I started taking them, a year ago? So my concept of self was all of that, There's a lot of people I think that, even later in their life are thinking about maybe, this is the time I should start, but then who am I? And that's
Yeah.
such a scary place to be. I mean, I'm not I can't say anything personally. It's brought out more of me.
Mm.
And that's what I want to share to people. I don't know if you have any like context of, how it felt on and off meds and if one felt more like you or what that experience was like. Because
Oh yeah. I mean, I felt like there were depths of myself that I didn't even have access to before.
yes, that is a beautiful way to say it. That this just unlocks us, I think, to like open the pages almost
Mhm.
of our
Yeah.
entire library.
But also it's important to acknowledge that, we're never a finished product. People change throughout their entire lives.
Certainly.
You change, your body chemistry changes, you may need to change meds, you may need to move to a different city or go to a different school or get a different job. Like there's a million different variables at any given time. And when you're young, that's especially true.
I'm going to keep that one. I love that. It's opening up different layers of ourselves. That's really beautiful. Are you you're very outspoken here, you seem to be very strong in what you believe in. Are you like this everywhere? Do you freely share what you do with everybody, or is this something that you kind of pick and choose who you disclose to?
Much to the chagrin of everyone around me, I'm like this all the time.
Hell yes, bring all the identity. This is authenticity. Yes.
I'm a very private person in a lot of ways, but as far as, activism and advocacy are such a big part of who I am and who I have to be just because of, the ways in which I identify. Like I can't not be an activist because it's just not an option when you are me. But I mean, beyond that, like I keep like some things to myself, but mental health advocacy is really important to me. Talking about trauma, talking about racism and sexism and, worophobia and transphobia and all sorts of things like that I faced. Like, I talk about that shit all the time. I have to talk about it first for my own survival, but it's also, something that's important to me to help other people to stay safe and stay informed and be able to advocate for themselves and be able to take care of other people, if they are in a more privileged position. So yeah, this is stuff that I'm always outspoken about.
I love
I'm not
that.
shy about it. It's not something that I hide. But then I'll be like weirdly like private about like, maybe I don't want to talk about what show I was watching on TV last night. Like, I don't know.
Intense.
I keep some things like personal and I'm like kind of quiet about some things, but yeah, like the things that most people are quiet about are generally the things I'm the loudest about.
And I mean, awesome. You are deciding what's worth, disclosing and what's worth not. Who the hell cares that sex is this shameful thing that we're supposed to not want to talk about? We're supposed to keep quiet. Like, if that's not what it is for you, then speak it. And I love that, right? I ask everyone on the show, what is one thing they want to normalize? I think this is a hard question because you've just, spewed left and right everything, so many things that I think I could pick apart threads of to normalize. But it is one question that I ask everybody. If, there was one thing that you wanted to be, this is my hill to die on that needs to be normalized, what would it be? I know, take all the time you want. I'm over here just like relaxing from everything going on.
I would say giving a fuck, empathizing. And, that applies pretty broadly to yourself and to those around you. I think the balance of those two is so important because a lot of people are doing one and not the other. I mean, life is short.
Yes. Well, it's been really lovely to have you on the show. I really appreciate everything that you've shared with us. Is there any last messages or anything that you'd want to say to anyone who's listening?
Yeah, I guess the last thing that I will sort of close with is just, we're entering a new era right now, and there are a lot of horrible things going on. And there's also a lot of hope around a lot of things. We're at the end-ish, hopefully, maybe kind of this pandemic. We're working toward, people getting vaccinated and hopefully people starting to get their lives back. But as we move forward, I hope that we can all learn some lessons in taking care of ourselves and one another, and the accessibility that we've built around, work and school and events and entertainment and, everything, you name it. I hope that we can, work to sustain some of those systems because they have helped people who were not able to access things since long before the pandemic even started. And I worry about people getting left behind as we go back. I don't want to say go back. There's no normal to go back to. Normal was the problem. But, as things open up, as we sort of shift to a more everyday approach to life, we need to make sure that we are not leaving people behind. A lot of people have been getting left behind in our society for a long time from, lots of different marginalized intersections. I'm specifically speaking around like issues of like disability access, but also like a lot of the things that are going on with racial issues right now, especially for like Black and Indigenous people and other people of color. We need to make sure that if we're going to move forward, we have to take everyone with us because we will not survive if we don't start working as a unit. And that cannot be at the expense of the identities of people of color or the participation of people with disabilities. It can't be at the expense or the exclusion of anyone. It has to be all of us or none of us. And that way forward is not through the conformity of marginalized people. It's through these sort of like ruling identities stepping back and not centering themselves anymore and making sure that we are giving to everyone according to their need. And that's what's been on my mind lately. I mean, a lot of things have, obviously, but that's sort of the main theme of it is that we need something different going forward. We can't go back to the same old shit.
Right. And the people who are at the center, how do they begin to even see that they are?
Yeah.
I hit them with a book. Like, I'm trying to,
Feel free.
like It's like I want to have action items, right? That kind of say, do this, do that, do this. But it's just, yeah.
Go to an anti-racism workshop. There are a zillion of them happening right now online.
Okay. Where would someone get that information if they want to do that?
I think it's Calling Us In is the name of it.
I can put that in the episode information. Perfect. Yeah. All of these things don't always have pretty nice bows on top to say this is what you have to do. And I think that even that would be taken away from everything to make it so simple as do 1, 2, 3, and then you'll be good to go, which is totally not the message either. So start having conversations, start talking to people, start learning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's like something that, most people don't even realize is a problem. Most people with that privilege are like, what? It's like, what's the problem? Why are you making such a big deal out of it? It's like, it's not a big deal to you because you're the one benefiting from it. Right. So it's like, if you are resistant to, have me, have the access to the same things as you, like that shows me that you're not benefiting just from having those things, but you are benefiting from my lack of access to those things.
Yes, exactly.
So think about that. Mm-hmm. And if you can say with confidence, like with your chest, that is chill, then I know exactly where you stand, and I don't need to have any further conversation with you about it.
X out. Goodbye.
Right? I told you I'm cutting people out with a machete.
Yes, which I think is self-care, truly. Can we normalize that, cutting out people with a machete as our self-care? It's important. Protect yourself, protect the energy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for all this information. I really, really appreciate you coming on the show. Is there anywhere that you'd like to plug for social media, a website, or anything?
Yeah, I'm at Cruel Valentine all over the internet on every platform, all social media, all pay platforms. And I am just cruelvalentine.com/links cruelvalentine.com is my website, but my links page just has links to everywhere else you can find me, to, do anything from send me a tip if you like what I do, or to buy some pasties from me, or to catch a future event that I'm a part of, or to watch my porn, whatever it is that you're into, to book me, to email me about burlesque lessons or a session or a conversation, business consulting, anything. That's sort of like the one-stop shop for me is cruelvalentine.com/links.
Love that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. This was really, really great. I really appreciate it.
Good. I'm glad. Join us on Instagram at Modern Anarchy Podcast, where we open up a dialogue about all of these topics. Otherwise, see you next week. And a special thanks to one of my favorite artists, Your Smith, for the intro and outro song to this show.